Welcome to Amber Book 40 Minutes of Competence. Today we're talking about integrated project delivery. I cannot wait to get started. So the question is, we want to identify the differences between these three types, these three flavors of integrated project delivery, or IPD. There's the single purpose entity, there's the project alliance, and then there's the relational contract. So before we get into that, let's kind of see what the IBP replaces. And so these are different contract relationships. And for those of you guys who have already started studying, this will be very familiar for you. For those of you who haven't yet, and you're kind of just dipping your toe in the water here, some of this at first will be a little bit confusing, like what are these graphs? So go ahead and fill in mentally the three components of a design bid build, kind of a traditional default architecture arrangement between the parties. Well, of course, it looks like this. We have the owner, and the owner is above the architect and the contractor. They're the client, and they're the customer. And they have a contract with the architect and a different contract with the contractor, the person who's going to build the project. And this has been the way that things have been done as kind of the standard or default since time immemorial. And it's been, as far as the ARE is concerned, if they don't tell you that it's something besides design bid build, you can assume that it's design bid build. So that's basically what we're talking about. We're talking about something that is kind of the default, at least as far as the ARE is concerned. Now, within this flavor of design bid build, which has its benefit proves to be cost. So the owner hires the architect, signs a contract with the architect produces a set of drawings. Those drawings combined with specs, become the contract documents. The architect helps out the owner in administering the bidding process. The project goes out to bid and contractors bid on it. And then the owner chooses which one they're going to give the contract to, and gives the contract to the bidder, which will eventually become the contractor once the bidder signs the contract. And the contractor then has a lot of leverage over the owner because the contractor often, to get the lowest bid, bids something so low that they're going to have to make up for their losses by issuing change orders, and from those change orders, they're gonna find their profit. Now, the advantage of this is having a marketplace. I mean, no matter what you think of capitalism, markets are extremely effective and efficient at matching people who can do something with someone who doesn't want to pay a lot of money for it. So, because the contractors are competing, you're going to get the best. You as the owner are going to get the best price, but because you're getting the lowest price, you're not necessarily getting the best quality. And because the architect had to do everything before the contractor was involved, you may not be getting the best schedule. Like, in other words, it's a slow process because everything is quite linear. First, the owner sends the architect the program. The architect designs all the way from schematic design through construction documents, and then the bidding process starts, and then the construction starts. Well, there were a few problems with that have kind of crept up over time. And one of them is addressed by the construction manager beginning about in the 1970s. So go ahead and mentally fill in, or you can sketch it out if you'd like, the roles for construction manager as advisor. All right, so this is what it looks like. The owner is, of course, still in the lead. And the owner will hire you, the architect, and hire the contractor. But in this case, the construction manager is brought on board. And the construction manager is kind of a feasibility cost scheduling expert who's going to be advising the architect from the beginning. Oh, you really shouldn't do it this way. It's not very waterproof. We've seen some bad results with other contractors. or you really need to work this into the contract, because we've seen in the past that contractors have tried to skimp on this if it's not explicitly set out in the contract. But mainly the construction manager was introduced, at least originally, to speed things along as someone who is an expert in feasibility in terms of construction, and someone who can move the process along from the beginning and still maintain kind of an adversarial relationship between the architect and the contractor, so that the owner can get high quality from the architect and a good price from the contractor. Now, as time went on, things morphed. And so if you start to see a pattern that there's kind of an evolution of these, that's because there's kind of an evolution of these. It's not like any of these probably would have crept up from the beginning. If we were to start over, and we may have a different set of contracts available to us, a different set of flavors, a different set of relationships. But because we started with each step, each new kind of quantum change really kind of was more of an evolution. It started with what was before, and it changed just a few things. And so we moved on to construction manager as agent. So the owner was less, maybe less, wanted to be less involved in the contracts, and the owner maybe wanted to have a little bit less risk. So the owner began giving the construction manager a bit more control. So go ahead and mentally fill these in. And these are actually pretty important for the exam, knowing how to fill these in. Here again, we have the owner as the boss, but in this case, the owner has only one contract, and that's with the construction manager. And now the construction manager is dealing with lawsuits and dealing with schedules and dealing with contracts and making sure that no one is messing with the owner. So the construction manager starts to act as an agent for the manager. The construction manager then signs a contract with the architect and a contract with the contractor. And the construction manager offers a buffer between the owner, especially a less experienced owner, or an owner who's maybe got other things that they're working on. All right. Now then, the construction manager took on even more risk. In fact, this flavor is called construction manager at risk. So this is construction manager as constructor. Go ahead and take a second to mentally fill in the parties and their contractual relationship. So now basically the construction manager has pushed over the contractor, and the owner is now hiring the architect, but also hiring the construction manager early. You see, that's a much quicker way to do things. And then at some point, the owner and the architect, the owner and the construction manager are going to work out the cost. So the construction manager has some control from the beginning, which may in theory save some money, but there's not going to be a bid process. The construction manager is kind of hired on early enough that they're helping the architect with feasibility and constructability. But the construction manager is also taking a good deal of the risk, because the construction manager now has to do all the things that the contractor used to do. And the contractor actually has quite a lot on her. She has to build it perfectly, and she has to build it just like the drawing says she does. And and the contract says she does, and she has to somehow make a profit doing so. All right. As another way to kind of speed things along and maybe transfer some of the hassle and risk to someone else, the owners came up with the DesignBidBuild version. Go ahead and fill in the parts. So now we have the owner and the architect, and the owner, architect, and contractor. But the architect and contractor have teamed up either to become contractor-led or architect-led entity, and that entity is working together to make a profit together. And kind of one of them is paying the other. But the owner only has one contract. Now the owner has lost a little bit of the quality control that comes from having an adversarial relationship between the architect and the contractor. But now that the architect and contractor kind of work for the same people, they're the same company, or at least temporarily they're working together as an entity. The owner only has one contract, but the architect and contractor they can deal with their own dirty laundry internally. So if there's a dispute, about how something was drawn in an incomplete way, and things are always drawn in big projects in an incomplete way. It's impossible to get it perfect. But the contractor can just talk to the architect and maybe resolve it with a little bit less acrimony, and possibly less likely to be a claim. But if there is a claim, the owner's kind of left out of it. And the reason we started doing this in part was because it's a bit quicker. You don't have to have, the architect doesn't have to finish everything and then it go out to bid. And in the early 80s and late 70s, interest rates were remarkably high. They were like 18%, 17% for loans. And so time really was money all of a sudden. That, you know, the idea of kind of taking 6 months or a year to design something and then taking some time to build it meant that you were losing all that money if you had already taken the loan out of the bank. The cost of financing was non-negligible at that point. And then we got a bridge design build flavor. Go ahead and fill the parts in there. And it looks something like this. So now the owner has a design architect, which is called a bridging consultant. And that design architect, bridging consultant, will take the drawings through the first portion of the design process. And then it will be handed over to a design build partnership, the production architect and the contractor. And so that way the owner has a little bit more quality control because the architect has not been captured by the contractor. Rather, there's a separate architect kind of making sure that things are getting designed in a slightly adversarial way, where they're making sure that things are being done right, hopefully. And then the owner is, but yet the owner is kind of, you know, for the maybe some of the code compliance and some of the construction administration and that kind of thing is going to be handled by a single entity. And that brings us to where we are today. Which is the integrated project, project delivery, and that's kind of a free for all. So in this case, and typically the way it's drawn is there's an owner, an architect, and a contractor, but it really is a free for all. This could be, let's say this project was to design a facility for repairing cruise ships. Okay, so. You could imagine a scenario there where the MEP engineer, because it's kind of a manufacturing type facility, the MEP, the engineer, may be important enough that we actually bring them into the project as well as has some skin in the game. And the IPD kind of responds to two things. One is the acrimony and kind of distrust and inefficiency that was those other systems. You know, in 2004, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics did a study, and they found that construction industry was alone in industries that have become less efficient over the last 25, 30 years before that. So there's a significant amount of waste. Most of the estimates are somewhere in the area of 30%. Waste in terms of people doing things because they're just trying to cover their butt and make sure they don't get sued later, or people doing things because that's the way it was always done, or people doing things because they're not working collaboratively and they're kind of working against each other, even though they're all working to get a building done. So the first mandate of integrated project delivery, or IPD, is to get everyone on more or less on the same team, or at least to get their incentives aligned together so that they're less likely to be working against each other and more likely to truly be partners, or truly be something closer to partners through the process, at least ostensibly, and in practice as well. And in fact, if you guys, I have never worked on an IPD project, so if you guys have, please, there's already a little bit of spirited debate in the chat. Just go ahead and put some more stuff in the chat if you've worked with IPD, and let us know how it went. Because I'm curious, the people that I know who have done it absolutely love it. But not everyone's kind of willing to do it, because as you're going to see, it definitely turns some kind of traditional ideas that are established with regard to laws, legal precedent, and insurance contracts for liabilities for the people involved, and risk for the financial risk. There's just a whole bunch of things that are now kind of up in the air. And this is the kind of thing, IPD in general is especially going to drive it's going to drive your accountant crazy. It's going to drive your accountant crazy when they're billing, but also with taxes. It's going to confuse your insurance agent. It's going to muddle all kinds of management roles if it's not done right. And even if it is done right, it may do some of those things. But the hope is that the benefit of collaboration will far exceed the risk of kind of a departure from expediency. So that's the first reason we're going to do it. We're going to do it because everyone is so sick of everyone covering their butts and spending so much time covering their butts that we're going to move on to this new flavor that gives us a bit more flexibility so that everyone can kind of work together, at least ostensibly. The second thing that brought about IPD as a flavor of contract is BIM. So once the drawings are kind of able to be continuously updated, then having these kind of formal relationships maybe becomes a little bit more counterproductive because there's so much of an opportunity cost lost. Because having BIM, you can imagine a scenario where the mechanical engineer goes in and sees some pipes that maybe aren't right, and maybe it's more efficient for the mechanical engineer just to move the pipes and to let the architect know, rather than the mechanical engineer have to tell the architect and the architect have to move the pipes. Maybe the mechanical engineer knows more and can actually go ahead into the master drawing or master digital drawing and go ahead and make changes. So with BIM came at least the option of collaborating in a more real-time way. All right. So this is an image we made the other day, and I figured I'd share with you. You can take a screenshot of it, or you can take a phone photo of it, or you can ignore it altogether. If you're in the Amber book, it will show up and you can look at it there. But it combines a couple of tables in the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice into one table, and it, I think, makes it a little bit more clear than any of their tables do on this particular thing. And so we have traditional design, bid, build, and the driving factor is cost. We have pre-design, schematic design, design development, construction documents, then the bid, the contract, then the subs are hired, then we come up with a cost, and then construction administration. And that's kind of our baseline. But then all these other flavors are there to make it, to give us some other, mainly to give the owner some other driver besides cost, and still allow the architect and the contractor to be protected by established case law and established insurance contracts and just established tradition. And so one of them, under that same design bid build, where we had, you know, the owner and the architect and the owner, the architect, and the contractor. Under that, there are a couple other flavors where the contractual relationships are the same, more or less, but in negotiated select team, you see the contract is awarded earlier. And what we're doing there is there's a contractor we really love, and we want to hire him early on because we want him to help us with buildability, constructability. We want him to be involved in the design a bit, at least at the beginning of design development. But because the contractors are no longer bidding later, it says bid there, but actually we probably should get rid of that. Because the contractors are no longer bidding against each other in quite the same way, we've lost maybe some of our cost advantage. And then for cost plus fixed fee, the contractor is going to be paid something. And again, the contract is going to come a bit earlier. The contractor is going to be paid something to cover their costs, and then also they're going to be paid by the owner a fee that's going to make up the majority of the profit for the contractor. And what that accounts for is, well, let's say that we were building a cruise ship. Let's say we were building a cruise ship repair facility. And now it seems that there's a pandemic and no one wants to go on a cruise ship anymore, but we're mostly done. So now what is this facility going to be? And maybe it's for seaplanes or something like that. So maybe we're going to start to adjust it, and we don't want the contractor to totally mess us up with change orders and because we're changing things to adapt to seaplane repair instead of cruise ship repair. All right. And then construction managers brought on. We have CM as advisor, and again, there's different orders. We have CM as agent and CM as constructor, which is also called construction manager at risk. And then we have design build, and that takes some of the risk off the owner. And we have both our standard and our bridging. So anyhow, that's that. So let's go back to our actual question, shall we? Within IPD, it's kind of a free-for-all and it's Thunderdome, but there are three general baskets that we can put most, I don't know about most, many certainly, of the IPD contracts in. The three most common. And the first is this idea of a single purpose entity. And the single purpose entity, you, the architect, you've kind of said, okay, I'm going to create a temporary legal agreement. And I'm going to make a new company, maybe an LLC, and I'm going to join up with the, let's keep it simple, join up with the contractor and the owner, and we're going to make this new company. And the architect architect's going to own 15% of the company, and the owner's going to own 55%, and the contractor is going to own the rest. This company is then going to be essentially the new owner. And so the new owner, this company, this single purpose entity, this new LLC, this new LLP, is going to pay your design costs. So you, the architect, are going to pay your design costs and maybe a small fee. I'm giving you examples of a single purpose entity. It doesn't mean every single purpose entity has all of these features, but I think it's easier to talk about these from the specific to the general than to talk about them from the general to the specific. So, you, the architect, have teamed up with the owner and the contractor. You're going to build this facility. You've agreed as part of your contract that this entity is going to pay the cost of your architects, but not much more, maybe a tiny bit more. And so you may make nothing on it. And then upon completion, or almost nothing on it, on the design. But here's where it gets interesting. Upon completion, the new company is going to sell the cruise ship repair facility to Carnival Cruise Lines, let's say. And you get to earn some of the profits. So they sell it for $75 million to Carnival, and you may get whatever percentage of the profits are there as per whatever was laid out in the contract. Now, if there's again a pandemic and everyone realizes that cruise ships are kind of petri dishes that are floating out there in the water, then maybe the cruise ship industry is like, you know what, we're declaring bankruptcy. I know you already started this cruise ship repair facility, but we can't buy it. So you guys are on your own. Well, now you, the architect, because you've taken some of that risk, you now have lost not just your design time, but it's quite possible that this single purpose entity took out a big loan. Now you guys are on the hook for this big loan. So you could have theoretically lost $10 million on this particular thing, because it's not super easy to sell a cruise ship repair facility to a seaplane company. It's just obviously for all kinds of reasons. First of all, the size and the scale, but secondly, what seaplane company is going to spend $75 million on a repair facility? So we may be in big trouble. So with this single purpose entity, we own a company, and that company has taken the risk, and now we're on the hook. But there's a high upside. There's a significant upside. All right. Our second flavor is this project alliance. And the project alliance says, okay, we're still going to tie success for the project to your profit. You meaning the architect, and frankly, you, the contractor. So now we're going to build this cruise ship repair facility, and the three of us are going to we're going to kind of jump in the bed together, and we're going to be partners, and we're going to agree not to sue one another. And in this case, the developer is going to pay your team, you, the architect, for their time, but maybe, let's say, not for overhead or profit. And then the developer and the contractor and you are saying, okay, we're in this together, but not really. The owner is the one who's going to take the loss if there's a pandemic and no one wants to buy a cruise ship facility. But we're in this together in that we're going to tie our incentives to whatever's important for the project. So if the project needs to be energy efficient, then you're going to get $50,000 to become energy efficient. So if the EUI, which means the energy use intensity, as measured in kilobTUs per square foot, let's say that that's going to be less than 500. If we can get this project less than 500, then you're going to get $50,000, and the contractor is going to get $70,000 as a bonus. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means it's not enough for you to just kind of say, oh, it's green. You're on the hook for making sure that if you're going to make a profit, you really want to make sure you want to dot all your I's and cross all your T's to make sure that this facility is actually energy efficient, because your profit depends on this in this model. And the contractor, likewise, you're not on the site all the time, and even the contractor's not on the site all the time. In a new building that's built with poor oversight and detailing might be 20 times leakier than this facility if it were built by someone who is really on the ball in terms of sealing up every hole for every penetration, for every duct and pipe. So you can make facilities way more efficient as a contractor, even under the same kind of construction document set. Well, now the contractor also has an incentive to make sure that this is really tight. So she's going to have a blower door test, blower door just in the facility all the time. And every time that a new sub comes on, every morning she's going to run the blower door test, say, oh, look, it's 1.2 air changes per hour. Check it again in the evening. Oh, look, it's still 1.2. But one day she's going to be 1.2. And when she checks it again in the evening, it's going to be 2.3. And she's going to say, all right, someone made a hole somewhere in this building. And she's going to call everyone together who was there that day and say, okay, who made a hole? Our system says there's a hole somewhere there. So the idea is that you, the architect, you're not going to hire the energy modeler who's kind of going to tell you what you want to hear by saying, oh yeah, this will be good, this will be efficient. Don't worry, I'm sure everyone's going to buy a very efficient Energy Star computer, and no one will run a little space heater in their office and so forth. And instead, you're going to hire the more realistic energy modeler and say, okay, what's the worst case scenario if everyone puts in a little mini fridge under their desk and that's groaning away all day? What's going to happen? And so we want to make sure, because we want to make sure our profit doesn't come in unless we're energy efficient. Likewise, maybe we'll, if we can get the certificate of occupancy by next June, we're going to get another $150,000. And our contractor is going to earn her bonus too. If it comes in under budget, maybe we are entitled to say 15% of the savings. So if we can build this for $1 million cheaper than it was going to be to begin with, then the owner doesn't take all that savings. The owner is going to incentivize us because we were looking after costs from the beginning in a realistic way, not in an optimistic way. And we were able to say, the team was able to save $1 million, and 15% of $1 million is like $150,000 additional too. So you get the idea. We're all a team in the Project Alliance. We're all a team, but we, the architect, are not going to probably lose money if there's a pandemic. But we're also there's also some significant upside. Basically, our profit is dependent upon being on time and or under budget and or energy efficient and or anything. I mean, you could make, you could say that the metric for measuring is going to be whether or not the owner of the cruise line and his spouse stay together through the process, and that you're going to get, that as your payment for that, you're going to get season tickets to the Packers. I mean, you can make any reward system and you can make any hurdle or metric that you need to meet. It's going to be kind of project specific. All right. Finally, we have the relational contract. And the relational contract is kind of like the Project Alliance, except for we're not quite a team. We're not quite a team. So in the relational contract, the owner and the contractor and the architect are going to jump into bed together, but really the owner is going to be first among equals. So the owner still gets to make the call. He's going to decide, okay, it looks like there's a pandemic coming. We're going to shift gears. And you, the architect, are going to say, oh, there's no pandemic. It'll be fine. That's all still over in China. And the owner says, no, we're going to shift gears. We need to figure out what we're going to do. Well, the owner is in charge in this situation. You're not really a team. The owner makes the tough calls. And in the relational contract, unlike the Project Alliance, in the relational contract, the owner and the contractor and the architect haven't agreed not to sue one another. So we're still kind of covering our butts. We're still submitting long RFIs because we need to be clear, because we're not totally on the same team. So you might ask, okay, well, then why is a relational contract even IPD at all? It sounds like a relational contract to me sounds a little bit like DesignBidBuild or DesignBidBuild. Sounds a little bit more like design bid build. We're not, the owner's still in charge. We're not agreeing to not sue each other. What's the deal? I can't lose money in both of these. I'm probably not going to lose money. I may not make a profit if the building doesn't perform. And that's the difference, is that that's the difference between the relational contract and like a design bid build or some of the other flavors we looked at. In the relational contract, we're not making money probably unless we meet these benchmarks. So unless we get LEED certified, or unless we make it so that there's certain occupant satisfaction surveys for the people who work there are at a certain level, or whatever is important to the owner. And is worked into the contract at the beginning. That's what's going to determine a lot of our compensation. That's what makes it IPD. So to review, the single purpose entity, the three of you guys jump into, make a team and start a new company that you each have ownership of. You have a high risk because you could lose your shirt because of some change in the market, or an earthquake that you didn't have insurance for, or something like that. And it's a little bit muddy, but it's high risk, high reward. And frankly, my sense is that most of us are a little bit too risk averse in business. Now, if you have, it depends on what your situation is, obviously, how much risk you're willing to take. But the risks, we evolved to not take risks. We didn't want to poke the bear. The bear could kill us. And so we didn't take risks. We didn't wander off at night and away from the fire, because if we did, the panther would kill us and eat us. And so the people who had a tendency to be risk takers were killed off by the panther, and the rest of us had babies and passed those risk averse genes on. Now, when we talk about risks, the risks are generally not life or death, but the rewards are significant for taking on those risks, or can be if they're done smartly. So you want to be smart about risk, but you don't want to be too risk averse. And I have a feeling most of us are too risk averse. Anyhow, that's a single purpose entity. And if the project makes money, we own the company that owns the project, and that project is sold or maybe even leased. You can imagine a scenario where we're leasing to Carnival Cruise Lines, and they're paying this new entity we've created. They're paying them $400,000 every quarter. $100,000 a month, and you as the architect are getting income of $20,000 a month in perpetuity, as long as Carnival has a lease. So that's the single purpose entity. The project alliance aligns the incentives with whatever's important to the project, so that your profit is probably tied to the performance of the building. But you're not going to lose money if the finances don't work out on the building. That's not true. You may, if the contract says that you're not going to get your profit if it goes over budget. So in that way, you've kind of lost money. But they're still going to pay for your design time. And you guys are all in alliance, so you've agreed to be kind of co-partners, maybe not totally equal, but you've agreed that you all have skin in the game and you all get some say. And then finally, the relational contract, you don't have the risk and you're not really a partner in the same way, but you're getting paid based on, you're getting your profit based on the performance of the building. All right. So that concludes that. This is next week's, this is next week's 40 minutes of competence. Someone kept asking me in the chats, can you do something on solar heat gain coefficient? And so yeah, sure, we'll do something on solar heat gain coefficient. So I want to purchase a smaller air conditioner than the one needed for my current building design. How can I reduce peak radiant solar heat gain by 6,000 BTUs per hour? We're given that we have 100 square feet of skylight, no other apertures or windows. We're given that the solar heat gain coefficient of the skylight is 0.80. We're given that the R value of the glass is 2.3, that the infiltration of the skylight is 0.1 CFM per square foot of glass, that the peak solar radiant heat striking the outside of the glass is 150 BTUs per square foot hour, and that the outside summertime design temperature is 92 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is your assignment for next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. and every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern we meet. And then let's cover one of the questions from last week's chat. And so the question is the mini split system, is a mini split system the same as VRF? And VRF is a variable refrigerant flavor of system. And yes, the answer is yes. A ductless mini split or a ducted mini split is a type of VRS where you're varying the flow, variable refrigerant flow, I think is the F, where you're varying the flow of the refrigerant and turning all of these units in each space or in each zone, you're turning each one into either a condenser that's hot in the wintertime or an evaporator that's cool in the summertime. And especially with VRF, if you have a big building, I think architects intuitively understand that the east is going to be warmer in the morning and the west is going to be warmer in the evening. Or and then if you kind of go a little farther, they kind of understand that the room with some kind of machinery is going to be hotter than the room without the machinery. But what often happens in big buildings in cold climates for much of the year is that the perimeter is cold and needs heating, and the core is warm and needs cooling all at the same time. So you need air conditioning in the middle because of all the people and lighting and equipment from the building itself, the internal heat gains, and then you have the external heat losses around the perimeter. So you need heating and cooling simultaneously. And what any of these systems does is it allows, by moving the refrigerant around and making certain coils low pressure and cold and other coils high pressure and hot, it allows us to effectively and pretty efficiently actually move heat from the core to the perimeter of a big building. So that's a good use for it. And that's the one that's probably the best use that architects don't really already know about.
I just have a quick question for you. Is your addition on your house finished, and what exactly is it researching?
Yeah, so the addition on my house, for those of you who have been with us from the beginning or have taken the Amber book before, I made a bubble wrap addition to my house. And what you can do is you can, if you actually did an article on it this summer, and it got first place in the popular choice and was a finalist in the Architizer A+ Awards, kind of internationally. I lost one of them to UN Studio, and I was in the other one with Lake Flato, and they got the jury award. But anyhow, you can Google Ermann Dwell, or you can Google bubble wrap house Architizer, and you can see what it eventually looked like. And what I was researching is so, you know, there's this kind of always this this weird, not weird, it's just a normal inverse relationship where we can have more thermal resistance, so we can keep the heat in better, but have less daylight because we have less glass. Keeping in small buildings, letting daylight in is really kind of anathema to keeping heat in. Or we can not keep as much heat in, but we can have lots of daylight. And so for years I was looking at, okay, how can we kind of do both? And so my question was, if I fill this with bubble wrap, can I do both? Now, of course, I knew that light would come through if I did bubble wrap, but I didn't know if I had these layers of bubble wrap. And what the assembly is, for those of you who don't know, it's 2 layers of glass and then 4 curtains of bubble wrap with 5 air spaces. So it's kind of a Semper thing where you have this fabric, almost a bubble wrap, in between these layers of glass. And the R value, at least theoretically, is something like 13.6. And so it has an R value equivalent to an opaque wall, but it glows beautifully. And so my question, kind of the research was, does this work? In other words, is the bubble wrap going to melt? Is it going to tear? Is it going to furl? Is it going to yellow? Is it going to kind of curl up? Is there going to be spiders inside and spider webs that I'll never be able to clean? So it was more of a, is there going to be moisture there that's all the time? So it was more of a kind of constructability and building enclosure feasibility, and sure enough, it worked. So I'm still always looking for people who are interested in using it for their own projects, because that was kind of the idea, is that I frankly don't have the wherewithal to distribute it nationally, to warranty it, to support it. But lots of people, lots of companies do. And so what I would love to be able to show them is that architects are interested in it. And if I can show them architects are interested in it, then I can hopefully license this or even give it away. At this point, I would give it away to a company who's going to manufacture it and get it out there. Because for big buildings with curtain walls and cold climates, or for small buildings in mixed or cold climates, I think the bubble wrap, at least from a building science point of view, has a significant upside. And actually, you can also see the website where you can go kind of register to get more information on it and to register your support for it. Should in the future someone want to make it, is called, well, the product is called Fizz, F-I-Z, because of the bubbles. My son actually named it. And so if you go to fizzwall.com, so FIZWALL.com, you can also see pictures of it, and you can be put on our mailing list. And when I say mailing list, I can almost guarantee I will never be mailing you anything. I just want to be able to show a manufacturer that architects are interested in.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
Hey, I want to go back to the BIM relationship to IPD.
Mm-hmm.
So since BIM is such a big part of IPD and becoming so prominent, let's say the architect is in charge of the BIM model, since
Mm-hmm.
we usually are. And usually, it gets distributed throughout the parties, to the client and the contractor. The model usually has inaccuracies, and is there something that the architect can do to mitigate risk in that sense? Like, is there something
So
that we
risk from being sued by the owner or contractor, or risk from developing a bad reputation? What's the risk we're trying to mitigate?
Well, the inaccuracies in the model, let's say.
Oh, I see. So
what you're distributing.
The risk of bad quality. How can we as architects mitigate some of the risk from a BIM model that's inaccurate? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, the drawings were always inaccurate, and the BIM models just allow us to see clashes in a way that we didn't see them before. Maybe some of you guys who are working on BIM and risk, and maybe even BIM and risk and IPD, can chime in the chat. But I don't know. That's a really good question, and that's something that, frankly, there's a lot of things I know better than you guys, but there's some things I don't, because I'm not dealing with it every day. And so I probably know more about this stuff than most of you guys, but there's a few of you guys who are dealing with IPD and contracts every day, and you guys, and this always happens. There's always, if there's enough people, there's always someone who knows a bunch about elevators, and I'm talking about elevators, or someone who knows a bunch about code, and I'm talking about code. So there is probably someone. And so, from the chat, someone said, no GC to verify in field everywhere. But again, the idea behind the IPD, especially these first two flavors of IPD, where we're not suing each other and we're really teammates, is that we're trying to kind of eliminate that inefficiency, where everyone's saying, you make sure to verify. Well, now, the general contractor, to meet his contract, has to verify things, when in reality, probably they're not worth verifying everything. And so the idea of GC to verify in the field everywhere, which is what, write that in the drawings, the contractor then is going to charge the owner for the time doing that. And so the whole system becomes less efficient. So I think the general consensus among the economists is that, come on, guys, you can do better. And in fact, for those of you guys who are following Katerra, and I think Katerra is spelled Katerra, and maybe some of you guys work for them because they bought A or St. Gross, but there was a bunch of kind of venture capitalist Google types who got together and said, okay, we have billions of dollars to invest in some industry. What we're going to do is we're going to hire a research firm, and they're going to tell us what is the industry that has been least transformed by technology, and then we're going to transform that industry with technology. And so Katerra, and you can go on the website and check them out. So Katerra, they did their research, and they found out that they were agnostic. They were willing to invest in any industry, is my understanding. And they found out that by far, the research found out that by far the construction industry is the one that has been the least transformed by technology. And so Katera then bought an architecture firm, and they built their own wall panel facility in Arizona, and they bought a window manufacturer. And so they're trying to vertically integrate. Now, this always happens with any industry. Things are horizontal for a while, and things are vertical for a while. But the idea is that if we can integrate, if we can combine as many of these as possible under the same roof, or at least align them so they have the same incentives, the idea is we can chip away at a really serious problem at the macro level, which is that everybody is trying to make sure that they're not blamed, and that that is not an efficient way to make something.
If I can add, this is Eric. The risk on BIM with architects is less because your model are being vetted at the same time while you're doing it with a GC for efficiencies and constructability. Same time with cost efficiency from the so-called owner if there is a relationship contract.
Yeah.
Or relationship contract.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I think the fear that maybe architects have is that, okay, if there's a clash, now I'm going to be called on it. Whereas in the past, maybe the MEP contractor who was installing the duct just kind of figured out a workaround in the field, and that no one ever knew about it. At least the owner didn't know about it, and now the owner is more aware of it, or now that the architect is in the room who drew it, and he or she is being called on it. But the idea behind IPD, go ahead.
they are aware, and these are being brought up every day for risk management. And so if there's some clash detection, there's easily being seen, and your architectural model are being corrected right away. So
Right.
both GC has its own model, and your model are being clashed together with another third-party MEPs and other form of other entities that goes together with IPD.
Thank you, Eric. All right, I have time for one more question.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Just going back a little bit to the IPD options, just trying to type a question, but it's easy to just ask you directly. The HPP book mentions the 3 types as transitional, multi-party, and SPE. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same things, like when you
That's a really good point. So this actually came. These 3 types came from so maybe I need to look at my Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice. Someone asked me at some point, what are the 3 types of IPD? And this actually came from, I'm pretty sure it was the same link that somebody threw in the chat. So it was AIAcontracts.org, contract doc pages 27166, integrated project delivery IPD family. I think that's what it is. Let me pull it up on my computer right now. So it's called, I mean, so I'm going to put the link where I pulled this from on the chat, which actually may be a bit different than the one that I read, but it's probably in multiple places. And it is called, it's from AIA National and AIA California Council. And it's called Integrated Project Delivery, a Guide. And there are these 3 types. And you're telling me that Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice has 3 other types, which may have be different names for these same things, or maybe something different.
SP is the same, just how it's named. I just want to make sure it's like there's no.
So the single purpose entity is the same thing?
Yeah, they call SP, and I think they use C195.
Okay.
Just in
So
the chat, that's 1068 and 1069.
So what I'll do, Luciana, is I'm glad you brought this to my attention. So what I will do is I will do some research over the week, and next week, besides the question that I gave you guys on solar heat gain coefficient, I will go through and confirm, because when in doubt, the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice is the one that, if you're talking about different types, that would be the one that you would want to look at. And so someone is writing that it's on pages 1068 and 1069.
Yeah, that's
And
yeah.
so I will, or actually that's you, Luciana. So I will take a look at that. I'll do some research and I will explain that. That'll be our, when we talk about last week's questions, that will be what I cover next week. And I'll let you know if it's different than, if the other two are different than these two with different names, or if it's actually two different.
If it's another flavor.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, the truth is, do you have a name for everything you're wearing now? No, of course not. And so you may have a name for the brand of the shirt, and you may have a name for the style of the skirt, but you don't have a name for the entire outfit, the entire ensemble. And so IPD is intentionally really open-ended. And so even saying there are 3 types, well, it's not 3 types. There's, depending on how you slice it, there's hundreds of types or 2 types or whatever. You could imagine a scenario where you're combining what I covered as a project alliance and the relational contract, and you're just saying there's 2 types. There's a single purpose entity where the architect owns the company and can lose her shirt in the process if there's a pandemic and the building is no longer useful to the client and doesn't get sold because the client goes bankrupt. Or there's this other type where the architect doesn't hold the same risk, but the architect, which I could combine these two and call them one type, where the architect doesn't hold the same risk, but the architect's incentives, her incentives are tied to metrics that are established by the owner for the success of the building. So the idea that one of these is one kind and one of them is another is a little bit like saying that Europe and Asia are different continents. I mean, we have been told that Europe and Asia are different continents since we were kids, but bullshit. Europe and Asia are not different continents. The Europeans who decided that based on probably cultural or racial decisions. But if you were to bring an alien down and said, okay, here's North America, that makes sense. Here's South America, that makes sense. Here's Africa, that makes sense. Oh, and this one big landmass, we're going to split that with this kind of unclear line down the middle or down the 1/4 of the way across, and we're going to call everything to the left Europe and everything to the right Asia. They would say that's crazy. Well, in the same way, you can divide this up any way you like. And so but given that we're all studying for the exam, we will study with the architect. We'll use the terminology from the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice. Now, for those of you, this is like a little warning for a bunch of you. And by a bunch of you, I'm going to say like 1 out of 4. It's a significant number. For those of you who obsess over things, and I'm not saying you are at all, Luciana, I'm glad you pointed this out to me. I'm totally glad you pointed this out to me. But for those of you who obsess over these different baskets and the vocabulary involved in them, it is a recipe for a failure in my experience talking to people. Because if you're obsessed over them without let me make it more clear. If you're obsessed over them without the kind of general understanding that goes in, if you're obsessing over vocabulary without the general understanding, that may have worked in ARE 4.0, even though there, I think it still didn't work in my experience. But with 5.0, they've gotten rid of a lot of the rote architecture trivia. And they're really, most of the questions, and despite all the bad questions that everyone remembers, most of the questions are pretty conceptually based. And you definitely don't want to freak out too much. But after saying that, if you want to know the 3 types of IPD, and there are 3 types in language put out by the National AIA in 2007, and there are 3 types probably written in 2002 or something by the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice, you better believe that if there's one of them you're going to memorize, it's page 1068 and 1069 of the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice. So for that reason, I will definitely go through there and I'll see what they say.
Sounds good. Thank you. It's just because sometimes it's important to know if they're how they're created, if it's by joint venture, if it's like an AIA document, like it's kind of good to know that kind of information too. So I just want to we don't confuse them.
Yeah, and I mean, again, the main our main purpose in this is not. We will, like I said, it is important to know the vocabulary, but our main purpose, actually, I mean, I use this as an excuse to give this other stuff. Like, it's just to kind of talk about the relationship and get some ownership of that. and look at kind of, and give you guys this. That was really the kind of the general, this was part of it, but it was not it was not everything. That was not my main goal. My main goal is to just talk about contracts and risk and relationships of the parties. And I will add that on the chat, Giovanni wrote, Michael, any recommendations for the 2018 code updates? Absolutely not. This is, the code doesn't change that much, and there's not that many questions on the code in the exam. And when there are, they're typically going to be, almost always going to be part of a case study where you have the code. So if there, I'm just not a big fan of spending time looking at what's different from the 2018 code versus the 2015 code. I could imagine a scenario where, 1 year something really important on the code changes, but unless you guys know of something that's fundamentally different, I mean, 99.9% of it's the same, and it's given to you as a searchable PDF anyway. And so the most important thing to know is to know, what you're looking for and what it means to be an occupancy type, and how to read a chart and trust yourself. That's a big deal for people. If you're not doing code stuff every day, you see on a chart that that there's one lavatory required every 50 occupants. And you see that on the chart, and you see that's the, for educational occupancy type, that's the, 1 every 50 lavatories, and you say, okay, I'm not sure that that's right. Well, that's right. But the more important thing is to know what a lavatory is, because I think a lot of us don't know what a lavatory is. A lavatory is a sink, not a room. It's confusing because we call the bathroom a lavatory, or some older teachers that we had did, and we may call the bathroom a toilet room, but what's the blanking right now? Someone write to me. What's the word in the code for toilet? It's not toilet. Someone will write it in a second, and no, it's not commode.
Water closet?
Water closet, thank you. But oftentimes we'll call the whole room a water closet, especially like in Europe. But so a water closet is either a toilet or a urinal, and a lavatory is a sink that doesn't have food waste, which is basically means a bathroom sink. And so it's much more important to know what a lavatory and a water closet is than it is to worry about changes in a table, because you still have access to that table almost for sure. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I love doing these, and good night. Get licensed.